Spring arrives cautiously in the Highlands, trying the hills with sunlight before retreating behind rain. Above Loch, the crofters welcome it by walking the old boundary of the common grazing. They follow stones placed by people long dead, repeating names and stories that have become almost as solid as the land itself. But in Loch, the oldest stone on the moor is not always the most honest witness. This year, an outsider has arrived with waterproof maps and the unwelcome suggestion that memory may have wandered from the truth. Before the day is over, one pale stone will raise a question no one in the village wishes to answer. Chapter 1. The Boundary Walk. The first dispute of the annual Boundary Walk concerned sandwiches. Mrs. Patel had brought egg and cress because people needed proper food on a hill. Jessie Curry had brought ham because egg sandwiches became dangerous after 2 hours in a pocket. "The day is too cold for a pocket to become warm," said Nessie Curry, who had brought nothing. "You said you didna want sandwiches," Jessie reminded her. "I said I didna want to make them." Outside Patel's shop, the walkers gathered beneath a grey sky. Flasks appeared from bags. Sticks were tested against the pavement. Coats were buttoned and unbuttoned as everyone formed a private opinion about the weather. Hamish Macbeth watched from the police station doorway. Inside his tunic was a letter from Strathbane, instructing him to prevent disorder, embarrassment to the estate, or any incident likely to interest the press. It also mentioned a possible future in community liaison. Hamish recognised a threat even when it was written politely. Such a post would mean meetings, polished shoes, reports, and leaving Loch. He had therefore decided that the boundary walk would pass quietly. The decision lasted until Rob Cameron arrived. Rob climbed from his battered Land Rover with the exhausted anger of a man in the middle of lambing. "Who marked the upper gate with red paint?" "The estate men," said Ewan Ross. "They were identifying access points. They can identify their own gates." Ewan was the elderly crofting clerk, a narrow man with silver hair and careful manners. He carried the wooden map case that had accompanied the walk for decades. "The paint will wash away," he said. "The estate will know." "No," Ewan agreed. "Estates seldom do." Mrs. Patel handed Hamish a flask. "You forgot tea. I expected to be back before I needed it. That is how men become cold and unreasonable." "I'm already unreasonable." "You are only lazy." Lugs followed Hamish to the lower track, looked up at the wet hillside, and sat down. "Come on," said Hamish. The dog turned his face toward the village. Hamish left him there. Lugs had apparently decided boundary law was a human error. At 9 o'clock precisely, Arthur Selwyn arrived in a spotless estate vehicle. He was a lean man in his late 50s, with rimless spectacles and the dissatisfied expression of someone accustomed to finding objects in the wrong place. He unloaded measuring poles, a tripod, map tubes, and several waterproof cases. "Planning to measure the whole county?" Rob asked. "Only the disputed section." "It wasna disputed until you came." A discrepancy exists, whether or not anyone discusses it. Arthur did not appear deliberately rude. He simply spoke as if accuracy excused everything else. Ewan introduced himself. "I sent you the traditional boundary description. You sent a transcription made in Milnufsen Catvin size, of an older record, which was not included." Ewan's hand tightened on his map case. "The line has been walked every spring for generations. Walking an error does not correct it." Several villagers heard that. The procession climbed above Loch, passing through the upper gate onto the common grazing. Wet rushes bordered the sheep track, and the moor rose in brown-green folds toward low cloud. Arthur stopped often to consult his instruments. Each pause allowed the villagers to offer information he had not requested. That drain was deeper before the storm of '93. That fence used to run farther west. "It did not," said Nessie. "It did," said Jessie. "That was where Mrs. McLean lost her scarf. That was another fence." Arthur soon learned to walk faster. Hamish stayed near Ewan. "How many times have you done this?" he asked. 42. "You count them? When you become old, people forgive you for counting things." Ahead, Rob was explaining the proposed development to Mrs. Patel. They say 6 low-impact cabins. Each will have 2 cars and visitors who think sheep enjoy being photographed. Visitors often believe animals are employed by the scenery, she said. At the first line of boundary stones, Arthur stopped. According to the estate survey, the legal boundary should run 28 metres east of here. Ewan opened his map case. The traditional line follows the burn to the Bride's Stone, then turns west. The watercourses have changed. The stones have not. Stones can be moved. Not these. They continued uphill. Fine rain began. Soft enough to ignore, but steady enough to enter collars. Jessie lost a boot in a patch of peat. Rob recovered a runaway flask for a neighbour who had spent the morning complaining about his fences. Hamish noticed. Villages quarrelled, but their quarrels usually had edges. Arthur appeared unaware of such boundaries. He measured, corrected, and questioned every local name that did not appear on his maps. The Bride's Stone stood on a low rise above the peat hags. Unlike the darker boundary markers, it was white quartz, broad at the base and visible from far down the track. They say a bride waited here during a storm, Jessie told Arthur. She wasna a bride yet, said Nessie. She became one later. Not to the same man. Arthur crouched beside the stone. This marker has been reset. Rob stepped closer. It has stood there all my life. That does not mean it was always there. My father walked this line, said Isla Cameron quietly. Rob's widowed mother wore a faded blue coat and had spoken little during the climb. Arthur pressed his measuring staff against the stone. There is different packing material beneath the eastern edge. Its alignment is inconsistent with the older markers. Ewan's voice remained mild. You cannot decide the history of a place by poking it for 5 minutes. I decide it through measurement. Arthur tapped the quartz again. A white flake broke away and dropped into the heather. Pale dust marked his dark glove. You chipped it, said Isla. It is superficial. You had no right, Rob said. It is a boundary marker, not a sacred object. Rob moved forward. Hamish stepped between them. That'll do. Arthur brushed at his glove, leaving a faint white smear. The stone has been moved, he said. Possibly more than once. Its current position cannot be relied upon. Ewan closed his map case. You are calling generations of people liars. I am saying repetition is not evidence. No, said Ewan. You are saying it is not evidence when it disagrees with you. The 2 men faced each other across the pale stone, one holding a modern measuring staff, the other an old map polished by years of hands. Below them, Loch vanished behind rain. Hamish looked at the fresh scar in the quartz, then at the villagers gathered around it. Rob was openly angry. Isla looked wounded. Ewan had become very still. Arthur merely checked another reading. To him, Hamish thought, the problem was a line in the wrong place. To everyone else, he had struck something that remembered them. Chapter 2. Tea at the Fank. The old sheep fank stood in a shallow hollow below the Bride's Stone, its walls patched with newer wire and stones borrowed from 3 different generations. By the time the walkers reached it, the rain had settled into the steady Highland sort that did not fall so much as remain in the air. Collars darkened, hair flattened. Nobody admitted to being wet. Mrs. Patel organised the tea because no one else could be trusted to pour without discussing the boundary at the same time. Cup first, she told Rob Cameron. Argument after. I'm no arguing. You are holding your sandwich like it has offended you. Rob looked down at the crushed bread in his hand and loosened his grip. Arthur Selwyn stood beneath the narrow shelter of the Fank wall, studying his maps. He had removed the glove marked with quartz dust and placed it beside his equipment. Ewan Ross remained a few yards away, pouring tea from an old green flask. The distance between them was small enough for conversation and large enough to be deliberate. Hamish accepted an egg sandwich from Jessie Curry. I thought these became dangerous in warm pockets, he said. That was Nessie's sandwich. I didna have one, said Nessie. Then this must be safe. Jessie frowned, uncertain whether he had agreed with her. Arthur held up his receiver toward the clouded sky. The satellite reading confirms the discrepancy. Ewan sipped his tea. The satellite has never wintered here. It does not need to. That may be its weakness. Arthur lowered the instrument. Mr. Ross, boundary walks are useful as cultural customs. They are not reliable surveys. The word cultural made several villagers look as though they had been accused of performing for tourists. Rob spoke before Ewan could reply. That ground keeps my sheep alive during lambing. It is no custom. The grazing rights can be reassessed. By whom? The estate, the crofting commission, and the registered holders. After you move the line. I am not moving anything. I am identifying where the line should be. Rob took a step forward. Hamish caught his eye. Eat the sandwich. Rob gave him a look of disbelief. It'll improve your argument, Hamish said. At present, you sound hungry. A few people laughed. Rob did not, but he took a bite. Arthur turned to Hamish. You understand that the proposed access route depends upon this correction. I understand there are 6 cabins. Initially, that single word moved through the group more effectively than a speech. Mrs. Patel stopped pouring. How many, eventually? That is not part of my instructions. Then it is part of someone's instructions. Arthur looked faintly irritated. My concern is the accuracy of the boundary, and ours is what comes through it, said Isla Cameron. Her voice was quiet, but everyone heard. Arthur softened slightly. I appreciate that people are attached to land they have used for many years. Rob swallowed his sandwich. Attached? Do not, Hamish warned him. Arthur continued. But use does not create ownership. No, said Ewan. Sometimes need creates use, and use creates memory. Then paperwork arrives and pretends it was there first. Arthur studied him. You appear to regard poor records as a virtue. I regard tidy records with suspicion when they make untidy lives disappear. The rain clicked softly against the metal flask cups. Hamish watched Arthur's expression. The surveyor was not embarrassed by anger, but contempt annoyed him. Old boundary walks often preserve convenient inaccuracies, Arthur said. That is not an insult. It is a common historical pattern. Convenient for whom? Ewan asked. For whoever benefited. Rob gave a bitter laugh. There you are. You've decided already. I have decided nothing. But I will require the original grazing records. Ewan's hand stopped halfway to his cup. Arthur picked up a waterproof folder. In particular, the minute book covering the winter of 1981. Hamish saw the pause. It was no more than a second, but it was the first time Ewan had seemed unprepared. That book was damaged, he said. Damaged how? Water. When? Years ago. Is it still legible? Parts, maybe. Then I would like to examine it. Ewan placed his cup on the wall. I will see what remains. Arthur watched him carefully. You told the estate office the volume was lost. I said it had been damaged. The clerk recorded it as unavailable. Clerks often improve what they hear. Hamish looked from one man to the other. Ewan's answer had come too quickly and contained too many words. For a man who had spent 40 years settling disputes, that was nearly a shout. A Land Rover engine sounded on the track below. Blair appeared several minutes later, climbing toward the fank with the furious concentration of a man whose shoes were losing an argument with the mud. His face was red beneath his hat. Macbeth. Hamish Macbeth. Afternoon, sir. What's all this standing about? Tea. I can see it's tea. That saves explaining. Blair ignored him and looked around at the crofters. I've had a call from the estate office. They say their surveyor's being obstructed. No one has obstructed me, said Arthur. Not yet, Rob muttered. Blair heard him. You Cameron? You know fine who I am. Aye. And I know your sort. The fank became quiet. Hamish's expression changed very little. What sort would that be? He asked. Blair pulled off one glove and pointed it at Rob. The sort that wants the estate's land for nothing and calls it tradition. Rob took a step forward. Hamish moved first. His voice remained mild, but the soft Highland sibilance sharpened every word. The Camerons have paid in rent, labour, stock losses, and winters you wouldna last a morning in. So perhaps you'll keep your opinions inside your coat, where they might stay dry." Blair stared at him. Mrs. Patel handed Jessie the teapot before she dropped it. "You watch yourself, Macbeth." "I am. It saves others the trouble." Blair's face darkened, but Arthur intervened. "The dispute is technical, Inspector, not criminal. Everything becomes criminal if Macbeth is allowed to organise it." "I didna organise the rain," said Hamish. "You'd take credit if it embarrassed Strathbane." Blair turned toward the villagers. "This development means jobs, investment, roads maintained properly. And I'll not have crofting nonsense turned into a public spectacle." "No danger of that," said Nessie. "There is no public here." Jessie nodded. "Only us." Blair looked at them, failed to find an answer suitable for both sisters, and turned back to Hamish. "Keep this quiet. The press gets one photograph of shouting crofters, and the superintendent will hear about it." "Aye. And if Lochs embarrasses me again, I'll personally recommend you for that community liaison vacancy." Hamish smiled faintly. "You're too kind." Blair did not recognise the insult. He marched back down the track without accepting tea, which Mrs. Patel considered proof of poor judgment. The walkers gathered their things. Arthur packed away his receiver. Ewan closed the old map case with careful hands. As the others began descending, Hamish remained beside him. "The 1981 book," he said. "What about it?" "You," answered Arthur, before he finished asking. Ewan looked across the wet moor. I knew what book he meant. "Do you have it?" I told him. "It was damaged." "That wasna what I asked." For a moment, the older man's face showed not fear, but weariness. "Some records cause more harm by surviving than others do by being lost." Then he lifted the map case and followed the villagers downhill. Hamish watched him go. Above the Fank, the white bride stone remained visible through the rain, newly scarred and standing exactly where everyone claimed it had always stood. Chapter 3. The Map in the Tin Box. Ewan Ross lived in a white cottage above the Kirk Road, where the wind worried at the slates and the garden fence leaned inward as if listening. Hamish called that evening after feeding lugs, and failing to persuade him that a walk in the rain would build character. The dog remained by the stove. Hamish went alone. Ewan opened the door before he knocked. "I saw you from the window. You were expecting me?" "I was expecting someone." The cottage smelled of peat smoke, damp wool, and paper. Maps filled 2 shelves beside the hearth. More were stacked beneath a side table and weighted with a brass candlestick. A pair of women's slippers stood neatly by the stove, though Ewan's wife had been dead for nearly 4 years. Her chair remained beside the fire. Ewan noticed Hamish looking at it. "She complained if I put papers there." "Still does?" "In my head." He said it without sentimentality, then moved a folded map from the other chair. "Sit down." Hamish accepted a mug of tea. It was weak, but hot. "You've kept plenty of records," he said. "People remember what suits them. Paper remembers what someone chose to write. That doesn't sound like a defence of paperwork." "It is not." Ewan opened his wooden map case on the table. Inside lay several sheets, each mounted on stiff backing and labelled in his careful hand. Some showed grazing allotments, others marked drains, fences, and old sheep routes. "This is the map we use today," he said. Hamish studied the line running from the upper gate to the Bride's Stone. The ink had faded to brown. And this? The estate plan from 1967. The white stone appeared on both maps, though not with its local name. It was represented by a small cross near a bend in the burn. What was it called then? Nothing special. A marker stone. Not the Bride's Stone? Names come and go. Stones, too, according to Arthur. Ewan gave him a dry look. You have begun believing him already. I believe folk when they say something useful. Sometimes even Blair. That must require discipline. Hamish smiled. Arthur asked about the 1981-minute book. He did. Where is it? Ewan took a slow drink. The box it was stored in was soaked when the roof leaked. That still does not answer me. Some pages were spoiled. And the rest? Ewan looked toward his wife's empty chair. In that winter, rules were not always followed cleanly. What happened? You remember the cold of 81. I was a boy. Then you remember snow, not debt. His voice had changed. The careful clerk's tone had thinned, leaving something more private beneath it. Sheep died. Feed prices rose. The estate wanted arrears paid by spring. Men who had never missed rent found themselves choosing between bills and stock. And the Camerons? Ewan's eyes returned to Hamish. Why ask about them? Rob behaves as if the boundary is holding up his whole life. For some folk, a few acres do. Ewan stood and went to a cupboard. From behind a stack of account books, he brought out a square biscuit tin decorated with faded red roses. Inside were photographs, letters, and folded notices. No minute book? Hamish asked. No. Ewan handed him an old photograph. It showed a boundary walk many years earlier. Men wore heavy coats. Women stood near the lower track with baskets. The moor behind them was blurred by rain. Hamish recognised a younger Ewan near the centre. Beside him stood Isla Cameron, thinner and dark-haired, holding Rob as a small child. The Bride's Stone was visible in the distance. Who took this? My wife. Hamish turned it toward the lamp. The white marker stood close to a twisted rowan tree. He could not tell whether the angle matched its present position. You kept this but lost the minutes. I didn't choose what the water reached. There was no anger in Ewan's reply, only a slight stiffness that made Hamish distrust it more. While Ewan replaced the photograph, Hamish looked around the room. A larger mapboard leaned beneath the window. One corner bore a pale, gritty smear. Ewan saw him notice. Plaster, he said. I didna ask. The wall sheds dust. Hamish rubbed the mark lightly with his thumb. It was dry and faintly granular, but the room contained peat ash, plaster, and 50 years of paper dust. It proved nothing. Outside, something moved past the window. A dark shape rose onto the sill. Sunsea stared into the cottage for a moment, rain shining along his back. Ewan flinched. That creature shouldn't have been loose. Try telling him. Sunsea vanished again. Ewan began gathering the maps. You'll have another question. Aye. Why were you so quick to say the book was damaged? Because Arthur Selwyn asks questions as if answers belong to him. That annoyed you. It annoyed everyone. But you knew which winter mattered. Ewan shut the map case. I have been clerk. A long time. Hamish stood. As he moved toward the door, a newer sheet slipped from between two older maps and fell face upward. It was a recent estate plan. A pencil circle had been drawn around the Bride's Stone. From it, a narrow line crossed the disputed grazing toward the lower road. Beside the line were 3 words. Potential access route. Ewan stooped quickly and picked it up. You've been studying the development, Hamish said. It is my duty. More closely than the other plans. A road matters. To Rob? To everyone. Ewan slid the map back into the case. Hamish put on his cap. Arthur thinks the old boundary may be wrong. Arthur thinks anything not measured by him is waiting to be corrected. And you? Ewan opened the door. I think men who redraw lines should first learn who lives inside them. The rain had strengthened. Chapter 4. The Stone in the Rain. The telephone rang before Hamish had finished his first cup of tea. He answered it with the suspicion reserved for early calls and official envelopes. Police station. For several seconds, there was only wind. Then Rob Cameron said, "You'd better come up." His voice was flat, stripped of the anger it had carried the day before. "What's happened?" "It's the surveyor." Hamish set down his cup. "Where are you?" "By the Bride's Stone." Lugs watched him reach for his coat. The dog rose this time without argument. Rain had fallen through most of the night. By dawn the burns were running brown and quick, and the track above Lochs had become a ribbon of mud. Hamish drove as far as the upper gate, then continued on foot with Lugs behind him. Rob waited near the sheep fank. His jacket was unfastened, and one trouser leg was dark with peat to the knee. He looked younger than he had during the argument, and far more tired. "I was looking for a ewe," he said. "She's been away since last night." "And you found Arthur?" Rob nodded. "Did you touch anything?" "I checked whether he was breathing." "Anything else?" "No." "Who have you told?" "My mother." "Then you." Hamish studied him. "And Blair." Rob's mouth tightened. "I had sense enough to phone you first." They climbed together without speaking. The rain had softened to a fine drift, but the wind pushed it beneath collars and into sleeves. Lugs ranged ahead until the white stone came into view, then slowed. Arthur Selwyn lay on the far side of the marker. There was nothing dramatic in the sight. His green waterproof jacket was dulled by rain. One arm rested against the heather. His measuring pole lay several feet away, almost parallel to the boundary line. His field bag stood open. Hamish stopped Rob before he came closer. "Wait by the lower stone. I've already seen him." "Aye. No need to see him twice." Rob obeyed. Hamish approached carefully, choosing patches of exposed rock where he could. Much of the ground had been spoiled by rain, but the moor never became entirely blank. Water gathered in footprints. Bent heather held the memory of weight. Peat preserved whatever had pressed deeply enough. Arthur was dead. Hamish did not linger over that fact. He looked instead at what surrounded him. The field bag contained waterproof map sleeves, spare batteries, a tape measure, and a metal case of survey markers. One compartment stood empty. Arthur's receiver lay beside the bag, switched off. His notebook was missing. Hamish checked the jacket pockets without disturbing more than necessary. Wallet, keys, handkerchief, pencil, no notebook. Near the stone, a narrow measuring peg had been pushed into the peat. It was perfectly upright, too perfectly. The surrounding grass had been flattened by weather and movement, yet the peg stood neat as a church candle. Arthur had been a precise man, but no surveyor working alone in wind and rain would waste time placing a temporary peg so carefully after packing most of his equipment. Hamish crouched near the Bride's Stone. The chip Arthur had made the previous day remained visible as a bright mark on the quartz. Rain had washed away the loose grit around it. Not all of it, however. A pale residue marked Arthur's sleeve near the shoulder. Hamish remembered the dark measuring glove, dusted at the fingers after Arthur tapped the stone. The glove had been placed with the equipment during tea at the fank. Now the dust was higher on his coat, as though his shoulder had pressed against the quartz. Lugs sniffed near the open bag. "Leave it." The dog moved away and stood facing the peat hags, ears raised. An engine laboured on the track below. Rob closed his eyes briefly. "That'll be Blair." It usually is, when peace is nearly achieved. Blair appeared over the rise with 2 uniformed officers and a photographer from Strathbane. He was already breathing heavily, though whether from the climb or the prospect of authority was difficult to say. "Macbeth, what have you touched?" "Very little." Blair looked past him and saw Arthur. "Who found him?" Rob raised one hand. Blair's expression sharpened with immediate satisfaction. "You again?" "I was looking for a ewe." "At this hour?" "It's lambing." "Convenient." Hamish stepped between them. "Rob called me as soon as he found him. After threatening the dead man in front of half the village." "I threatened his measuring poles." Blair pointed at him. "That's the trouble with your sort. You think changing the object improves the threat. Rob's jaw tightened. Hamish spoke before he answered. "Go home, Rob." Blair turned. "He's going nowhere. He's wet, exhausted, and you have officers here who can take a proper statement after he has checked his stock. This is my investigation. Then investigate. Shouting the first theory that fits through your head is no the same thing." Blair stared at him. But one of the Strathbane officers had already opened a notebook. Rob looked at Hamish. "My ewes still out. Find her. Then stay at the croft." Rob descended toward the Fank. Blair watched him go. "You're protecting him. I'm preventing you from turning temper into evidence." Blair crouched beside Arthur's field bag and began naming its contents aloud, as though volume improved observation. "Survey equipment. Maps. No sign of robbery. His notebook is gone." Blair stopped. "What notebook?" "The one he used yesterday." "How do you know he brought it?" "He was a surveyor. He wrote down the weather. That proves nothing." "It proves he liked notes." The photographer began working around the scene. Hamish pointed to the peg. That was placed after the ground was disturbed. Blair looked at it. "It's a survey peg." "Idea." "Aye. Then the surveyor placed it." "Perhaps." Blair straightened. Cameron threatened him. "Cameron's grazing is at stake. Cameron was on the hill after dark and found the body before anyone else." "He says he was searching for a ewe." "Of course he does." Hamish looked toward the lower slope. Through the rain, Rob was already moving west instead of returning directly to his croft, calling softly across the moor. A man pretending to search might have gone home once the police arrived. Rob kept searching. Another vehicle appeared below, followed by McNabb and the police surgeon. Blair began issuing instructions to everyone within reach. Hamish moved a few steps away from the noise. From the bride's stone, the old boundary markers faded into mist. One line ran toward Rob Cameron's lambing ground. The other, according to Arthur, should have passed farther east. Yesterday, the stone had been an argument. This morning, it had become the centre of a carefully arranged scene. Arthur's open bag suggested haste. The missing notebook suggested purpose. The upright peg suggested someone who wanted the moor to point in a chosen direction. And the pale dust on Arthur's shoulder suggested he had returned to the stone after the village walk ended. Hamish touched the brim of his cap and looked down at the wet quartz. Someone had brought Arthur back to the boundary. What remained unclear was whether he had come to prove where the line belonged or to learn why it had been moved. Chapter 5. Blair likes a simple map. Rob Cameron's missing ewe returned shortly before noon. She came down from the moor by herself, muddy, unconcerned, and followed by twin lambs Rob had not known she was carrying. Under other circumstances, this would have improved his day. Instead, Blair was waiting in the croft yard. Rob's mother stood at the kitchen door while two Strathbane officers searched the Land Rover. Isla Cameron had changed from her wet blue coat into an old cardigan and apron. She watched the search without complaint, which made Blair behave as if her silence were an admission. Hamish arrived as Blair was questioning Rob beside the feed shed. "You threatened Selwyn," Blair said. "I threatened his poles. You drove onto the moor after dark. I was looking for that ewe." "And found nothing?" "I found her tracks near the lower burn." "No witnesses?" "The sheep was there." Blair glanced toward the ewe and her lambs. "I'll not be taking a statement from livestock. You might get more sense." Blair stepped closer. Rob had not slept. Mud dried in pale cracks along his boots, and a fresh scratch marked one cheek. His anger was still present, but fear had begun to show beneath it. That combination worried Hamish. Angry men often spoke too much when they became frightened. "Where were you between 10 and midnight?" Blair demanded. "On the hill." "Near the Bride Stone?" "Near enough." "Did you meet Selwyn?" "No." "Did you see his vehicle?" "No." "Did you move the stone?" Rob stared at him. "Move a lump of quartz in the dark, while searching for a ewe? You had motive." "I had lambs dying in wet fields. That was motive enough to be angry." Blair smiled without warmth. "Angry enough to kill?" Hamish cut in. "That'll do." Blair swung round. "You keep out of this. I'm trying to keep you from asking the same question until you mistake repetition for proof." One of the officers called from the Land Rover. "Sir?" He held up a small, clear evidence bag. Inside lay a white chip of stone. Rob's face emptied. "That was under the passenger mat," said the officer. Blair took the bag carefully. Well, I've never seen it," Rob said. Blair turned the chip beneath the grey light. It was small, sharp-edged, and unmistakably pale. "A piece of the broad stone, perhaps?" "You'll need it tested," said Hamish. "I know that." "You sounded as if you'd finished." Blair ignored him. Rob moved toward the vehicle, but the officer blocked his path. "That wasna there yesterday." "You expect us to believe someone planted it?" Blair asked. "I expect you to believe the truth." "The truth appears to be sitting in your Land Rover." Hamish held out his hand. Blair hesitated, then passed him the sealed bag. The chip was clean. That was the first thing Hamish noticed. Rob's passenger footwell was thick with peat, straw, sheep hair, feed dust, and the sort of dirt that developed layers of its own. Anything carried down from the moor on a boot should have collected black grit or fibres. The quartz chip had none. Its white surface was almost bright. Hamish looked at the underside of the passenger mat. Mud had dried along its ridges, but the hollow where the chip had rested showed no matching pale dust. "How long since you cleaned this vehicle?" he asked Rob. Rob looked offended. "Last summer. Inside? Possibly the summer before." "That, I believe." Blair snatched the bag back. "It was found in his vehicle. That's what matters. It matters where it was found, and what is missing from it." "Oh, here we go. No peat stain, no black grit, no sheep hair. It didn't come down in Rob's boot from the track. It may have fallen from his pocket. Then his pocket is cleaner than the rest of him." Rob almost smiled, then remembered the circumstances. Blair ordered him taken to Strathbane for formal questioning. Isla finally spoke. "Is he under arrest?" "Not yet," said Blair. "Then he'll change his clothes first." Blair stared at her. "My son is not sitting in a police station covered in sheep blood and mud so you can make him look worse than he is." Nobody argued with her. At Strathbane, Blair questioned Rob for nearly 2 hours. Hamish sat along the table, saying little. Blair had placed the evidence bag where Rob could see it, and returned to the same points again and again. The threat, the night drive, the disputed grazing, the quartz chip. Rob's answers became shorter. Once, when Blair suggested Arthur had laughed at him, Rob struck the table with his palm. "I didna kill him." Blair leaned back, satisfied. Hamish saw exactly what Blair saw. A tired young man with a temper, land to lose, and a piece of the dead man's stone in his vehicle. For 10 uncomfortable minutes, Hamish wondered whether the simple answer might be right after all. Then Blair asked about the old minute book. Rob frowned. "What minute book?" "The one Selwyn wanted." "I know nothing about it." "Your family benefited from the false boundary." "My family used the grazing everyone said was ours." "You never questioned it?" "Do you question where your own garden ends every morning?" Blair did not have a garden. He had a paved yard in Strathbane and disliked the comparison. When Rob was finally allowed to leave, Hamish followed Blair to the canteen. The meal consisted of grey stew, hard potatoes, and bread that resisted the knife. Blair ate quickly, perhaps from habit rather than optimism. "You're going soft," he told Hamish. "I'm considering the evidence." "The evidence is Cameron. The evidence is a clean stone In a filthy vehicle. Criminals make mistakes. Aye. So do policemen who are in a hurry. Blair pushed his plate away. You want this complicated because it makes you feel clever. I want it correct, because murder charges are difficult to take back. Blair lowered his voice. The estate wants this settled. There may be reporters coming about the development. We arrest Cameron. We have motive, threat, opportunity, and physical evidence. You have a chip from the murder scene, placed where we would find it. Blair's eyes narrowed. You tell anyone that theory, and I'll have you transferred before the week is out. Back in Lochs, Mrs. Patel gave Hamish a bowl of hot vegetable soup and waited until he had eaten half of it before speaking. They took Rob. For questioning. People are saying he has been charged. He hasna. They are also saying the stone was found in his pocket. It was in the Land Rover. By tomorrow it will be under his pillow. Hamish put down his spoon. Do not repeat this. But the chip may have been planted. Mrs. Patel looked offended. I do not repeat police information. No. You improve it and send it onward. She folded her arms. You are asking me not to speak? Aye, to anyone, especially anyone. Mrs. Patel considered the request with the solemnity of a judge receiving an impossible sentence. I will say nothing. Hamish left the shop feeling less reassured than he should have. Across the road, Nessie and Jessie Curry were waiting beside the postbox. Mrs. Patel watched them through the window. Then she reached for her coat. Chapter 6. Hamish's good sense goes bad. By 2 o'clock, Mrs. Patel had said nothing to 7 people. This required speaking to each of them separately. Nessie Curry heard that Hamish doubted the evidence against Rob. Jessie heard that someone had placed the quartz chip in the Land Rover. By the time the story reached the harbour, the stone had been wrapped in a handkerchief and planted by an estate employee wearing police boots. Hamish discovered the damage when Archie McLean stopped him outside the station. Is it true you're protecting Rob? I'm investigating. But specially? There is no special kind. Archie leaned closer. My cousin says the stone was planted. Your cousin lives in Inverness. He phones. Across the road, 2 women stopped talking as soon as Hamish looked at them. Rob's Land Rover passed through the village without slowing. Its windows were closed, though the rain had stopped. At Patel's shop, Isla Cameron stood beside the counter while Mrs. Wellington pressed a packet of tea into her hands. You'll need something decent in the house, Mrs. Wellington said. I have tea. This is better tea. Isla's expression remained polite. And I've brought broth, said Jessie. We made too much, Nessie added. You made too much, said Jessie. Isla looked at the tea, the broth, and the faces arranged around her. My son has not died. No one answered. He has not been charged either. Mrs. Patel busied herself with the till. We know that. Then stop feeding me as if I am sitting beside a coffin. She put the tea on the counter and walked out. Hamish followed her. Outside, Isla fastened her coat with stiff fingers. They mean kindness, he said. Pity is kindness that has decided the ending. They're frightened. So is Rob. She looked toward the road leading to the croft. He hears every whisper. Folk who borrowed his trailer last month now cross the street. That'll pass. Will it? Hamish had no useful answer. Isla gave him a tired nod and left. Mrs. Patel appeared in the doorway behind him. You said not to repeat that the stone may have been planted. Aye. I did not repeat it. What did you do? I told Nessie you were not convinced by the evidence. That is the same thing wearing a hat. It is completely different. Hamish looked through the shop window. Jessie was speaking rapidly to Mrs. Wellington, who was already putting the broth back into her bag. You've made things worse. I was trying to stop them blaming Rob. Now half the village thinks I'm hiding something for him. The other half thinks you have found the murderer. That is not better. Mrs. Patel considered this. It is more hopeful. The telephone in the police station rang before Hamish could reply. Blair's voice arrived at full volume. What have you been saying? Good afternoon to you, too. The superintendent has heard there's evidence tampering in Lochs. There may be. You told people? No. Then why is a reporter asking whether the estate planted evidence against a crofter? Hamish closed his eyes. Which reporter? That doesna matter. It matters if he's invented it. He says a source in the village told him. That narrows it to everyone. Blair breathed heavily into the receiver. I've got a clean arrest waiting, and you're poisoning it with village gossip. You do not have a clean arrest. I have motive, threat, opportunity, and the stone. You have a stone that looks as if it was washed before being planted. Keep saying that and I'll see you transferred before Friday. To community liaison? To anywhere with no sheep. Blair hung up. Hamish stood for a moment with the receiver in his hand. His plan had been simple. Let Blair continue focusing on Rob while he quietly checked the old records. Instead, the village had turned his silence into a position, his position into a rumour, and the rumour into an accusation against the estate. The telephone rang again. This time, it was Alistair Gunn, a retired estate clerk who lived beyond the southern road. He had agreed that morning to speak with Hamish about the boundary meeting of 1981. I'm sorry, Alistair said. I canna meet you. Why not? My daughter heard there are reporters. There is one reporter asking questions. That is how several begin. No one needs to know you spoke to me. They already know. Hamish looked through the window. Nessie and Jessie were standing by the post box again. What exactly do they know? That I kept copies of old estate records. Someone asked my neighbour whether I helped move the bride's stone. Did you? No. Then tell me what happened. A pause followed. Alistair's voice lowered. People remember that winter badly. That is why I need the records. The estate wanted certain grazing returned. Ewan argued against it. There was a meeting. Was Isla Cameron there? I'm not discussing names. You just named Ewan. That was different. How? I said he attended. You said, he argued. Another silence. Hamish could hear a clock ticking at the other end. Alistair, Arthur Selwyn is dead. I know, and Rob may be charged because someone has made his anger look like proof. The clock continued. At last, Alistair said, The stone had another name. Hamish straightened. What name? In the older records, nobody called it the bride's stone. What did they call it? The widow's stone. Why? I don't know. Or I don't remember well enough to say. Was that name used in 1981? Yes. Is it written in the minute book? I have said too much. The line went dead. Hamish remained beside the telephone. The bride's stone had sounded like a harmless village legend. A waiting woman, a storm, a marriage altered by weather. The widow's stone carried a different weight. He crossed to the window. Outside, Loch continued its afternoon routines. A delivery van blocked the road. Mrs. Patel rearranged tins in her window. Nessie and Jessie separated at last, each walking home with a different version of the same story. Hamish had wanted gossip to distract Blair. Instead, it had frightened the one witness who might have explained the old boundary. His good sense, he thought, had performed no better than lugs on the morning walk. It had looked at the hill ahead, sat down, and refused to go farther. Only one useful fact remained. Before the village made it romantic, before generations repeated the tale, the white marker had belonged not to a bride, but to a widow. Chapter 7. The Widow's Stone. Isla Cameron's cottage stood below the eastern grazing, where the land flattened just enough for a kitchen garden and a row of sheds patched with corrugated iron. Hamish arrived after dusk. A lamb bleated from somewhere behind the house. Another answered from the kitchen. Isla opened the door, holding a feeding bottle. You had better come in before this one decides you are its mother. A weak lamb stood inside a wooden crate beside the stove, wrapped in an old towel. Its legs looked too thin for the work expected of them. Rob sat at the table with a notebook of lambing times open before him. He rose when Hamish entered. Has Blair charged me yet? No. Only waiting for a better hour? Blair doesn't wait well. Rob looked as though he wanted to argue, but Isla passed him the bottle. Feed her. She fed 10 minutes ago. She disagrees. Rob took the bottle and sat beside the crate. The lamb began drinking immediately. Isla placed a kettle on the stove. If you've come to ask whether Rob went onto the hill, he has told you. I've come to ask about 1,981. The kettle lid rattled once. Rob looked up. What has that to do with Arthur Selwyn? Perhaps nothing. Your mother will tell me. Isla remained facing the stove. That is a policeman's answer. It is the only one I have. She spooned tea into a pot, one careful measure at a time. You've heard the old name, the widow's stone. Rob frowned. It has always been the bride's stone. No, said Isla. It has been called that for as long as you remember. That is the same thing. It is how mistakes survive. Rob stared at her. Isla carried the tea to the table and sat opposite Hamish. Her face was drawn with tiredness, though her hands were steady. My husband died in January of 1981, she said. A wall came down during a storm. By the time they found him, the snow had covered half the field. Rob lowered the bottle. You told me he died in an accident. He did. You never said the estate tried to take the grazing. You were a baby. I'm not now. No. Now you have enough worries of your own. She looked at Hamish. We were behind with rent. Feed had cost more than expected. There had been losses, and the estate factor said the upper strip should return to common management until I proved I could keep the croft. That strip is our lambing ground, said Rob. It became ours again. How? Isla's gaze moved toward the stove. People helped. That is not an answer, Rob said. It is the answer I had. She told it without drama. Neighbours brought feed after dark, so no one had to call it charity. A gate that should have been repaired by the tenant was repaired by 3 men who claimed they had been passing. You and Ross adjusted payment dates and argued that removing grazing from a widow in winter would cost the estate more in public shame than it could recover in rent. The estate still refused. So the walk changed, Hamish said. Isla nodded once. Not openly. No meeting was called to move a boundary. No one lifted the stone while the village watched. But that spring, the line was walked a little farther east. By how much? Rob asked. Enough. The stone was moved? I never saw it happen. But you knew? I knew men stopped arguing about whether I had the strip. Rob put down the empty bottle. All this time, you let me believe it was ours. It was ours in every way that mattered then. Not on paper. Paper did not feed you. His face tightened. That is what Arthur meant. No, said Isla. Arthur meant the paper was the only truth. That was not true either. Hamish, let the silence remain. The lamb shifted in its crate and settled against the towel. Ewan organised it? He asked. He organised most things people needed done without wanting their names attached. Did he move the stone? I do not know. Do you believe he did? Isla looked at him directly. Yes. Rob stood and went to the window. And now I am blamed, because someone decided to save us 45 years ago. No, said Hamish. You are blamed because someone recently put a quartz chip in your vehicle. Rob turned. Recently? The first shift may explain the history. It doesna explain Arthur's death. Isla rose and crossed to a cabinet. From its lowest drawer, she removed a photograph in a plain wooden frame. It showed a group of crofters standing on the moor after the snow had begun to melt. Their boots sank into black ground. Most looked tired, rather than cheerful. A younger Isla stood near the centre, holding Rob beneath her coat. Ewan Ross was beside her. In the distance, the white stone stood near a twisted rowan. Hamish carried the photograph closer to the lamp. The tree still grew on the moor. He remembered passing it during the boundary walk, but the present stone stood well beyond it. This was taken that spring? He asked. 2 months after my husband died. Who took it? Ewan's wife. May I borrow it? Isla hesitated. It is the only picture I have from that winter. I'll return it. Rob came back to the table. If it clears me, give it to him. Isla's mouth tightened. This photograph may prove the stone moved. It may also prove that everything your father believed about the grazing began with a lie. Rob looked at the lamb beside the stove. Then perhaps I should have been told. Yes, she said. It was not an apology, but Hamish heard the pain inside it. He wrapped the frame in a clean tea towel and placed it carefully in his bag. At the door, Ela stopped him. "If the estate corrects the line, what happens to us?" "I do not know. You could have said you would protect Rob." "I'll protect him from a false charge. I canna promise what lawyers will do with the land." The answer hurt her. He saw it, but she nodded. "That is more honest than most answers we were given in 1981. Outside, the rain had ended. The moor lay dark above the cottage, with only the line of the ridge visible against the cloud. Hamish looked back through the kitchen window. Rob was kneeling beside the crate, rubbing the lamb dry where milk had spilled onto its chin. Isla stood behind him, with one hand resting on the chair, close enough to offer comfort, but not yet knowing how. The old lie had begun there, perhaps in a winter kitchen much like this one. A widow, a child, unpaid bills, and neighbours deciding that mercy mattered more than a map, yet someone had taken that mercy and carried it forward until it had become something else. Hamish adjusted the photograph beneath his coat and started down the track. Behind him, the white stone remained somewhere in the darkness, no longer a village legend but a marker of the place where kindness had first crossed into deception. Chapter 8. The Board Under the Bed. The Kirk coffee morning began at 10 and had never, in anyone's memory, ended before noon. This was partly because the coffee was weak enough to require repeated cups, and partly because leaving early suggested either poor manners or a secret engagement. Ewan Ross attended every month. He arrived with exact change for the donation plate and spent 20 minutes correcting the dates on old photographs displayed in the vestibule. Hamish watched him enter the Kirk Hall, carrying a packet of shortbread. Then he drove to Ewan's cottage. Lugs had come along, though without enthusiasm. At the garden gate, he sniffed the wet grass, examined the cottage door, and waited on the step as if the investigation had reached a point best left to human foolishness. The door was unlocked. Hamish stood outside for several seconds. He had no warrant. Blair would not seek one while Rob Cameron remained his preferred answer. Yet Arthur's missing page, the planted quartz chip, and the old photograph all pointed toward records Ewan had concealed. Hamish opened the door. The cottage was colder than before. Ash lay grey in the grate. Ewan's late wife's slippers still waited beside her chair, giving the room the uncomfortable air of a place whose absences had been kept tidy. Hamish began with the map shelves. He found grazing plans, rent notices, drainage agreements, and decades of handwritten corrections. Ewan had recorded everything from broken fences to disputed sheep markings. Yet the 1,981-minute book was not among them. The newer estate map remained inside the wooden case. The pencil circle around the bride's stone had been darkened. The proposed access route crossed the disputed strip before meeting a narrow track beside land leased by Ewan's nephew, Callum Ross. Callum had spoken at meetings about sustainable tourism, local employment, and the need for Lochs to welcome controlled change. Hamish remembered him less for his speeches than for the new pickup truck he had bought before any cabins were approved. A line on a map was already being treated like money. Hamish searched the cupboard, the biscuit tin, and the drawers beneath the side table. Nothing. Lugs scratched once at the door. "I'm working," Hamish told him. The dog yawned. In the bedroom, everything was arranged with the same careful order. The bed was neatly made. A comb and shaving brush stood beside the basin. Ewan's shirts were folded into narrow, exact rectangles. Hamish crouched and looked beneath the bed. An oilcloth bundle had been pushed against the wall. He drew it out. Inside was a large wooden mapboard, older than the one Ewan had shown him. Rust marked the metal clips along its upper edge. A faded grazing plan remained fixed to the front. The bride's stone appeared under its older name, Widow's Stone. A thin ink line ran past it toward the Cameron grazing, then turned west near the twisted rowan visible in Isla's photograph. Someone had later added a second line in pencil, shifting the boundary outward. Hamish turned the board over. Pale dust marked the underside. It was not a faint smear like the one beside the window. This dust had collected in the groove between the wood and the metal frame. It was coarse, white, and recent enough to stand out against the dark backing. Caught beneath one metal clip was a tiny sliver of quartz. Hamish did not touch it. The board had been placed against the bride's stone, or used while someone worked beside it. The dust had gathered where ordinary cleaning would not reach. He looked again at the front. One of the clips held more than the map. A folded piece of waterproof paper had been pressed beneath it. Hamish eased it free with the end of his pencil. The page had been torn from Arthur Selwyn's field notebook. Rain had blurred the lower edge, but the handwriting remained legible. Arthur had written several measurements, then a note. Stone shifted twice. 1981 merci. 2024 access route. E. Ross has original record. Below that was a final sentence. Meeting him at marker tonight. Wants compromise. Hamish sat back on his heels. Arthur had discovered both versions of the lie. The first shift had protected Isla Cameron after her husband's death. The village had bent the walked boundary because the estate would not bend its demand. But the second shift was recent. The bride's stone had been moved again, only a little farther, creating an argument that the access strip belonged outside the common grazing. That interpretation would help Callum Ross secure the cabin lease and place the entrance road where the estate preferred it. Ewan had inherited gratitude for an act of mercy. Then he had used that trust for profit. Hamish pictured the meeting in the rain. Arthur standing beside the stone with his notebook. Ewan asking him to preserve the old arrangement, perhaps claiming that exposing 1981 would punish a widow for accepting help. Arthur refusing to conceal either movement. Arthur spoke truth, as if pain were irrelevant. Ewan treated old kindness as if it gave him permanent authority. Somewhere between those certainties, Arthur had died. Lugs gave a low sound from the doorway. A car door closed outside. Hamish replaced the old map and slipped Arthur's page into an evidence sleeve from his pocket. He left the quartz sliver where it was. McNab would need to see the board untouched. Footsteps crossed the gravel. Hamish moved into the front room as Ewan's key entered the lock. The older man stopped when he saw him. His gaze went first to Hamish, then toward the bedroom. You should not be here. No. You searched my house. Aye. Ewan placed the shortbread on the table. For once, his hands were not careful. The packet landed crookedly. What did you find? Arthur's missing page. Ewan closed his eyes. Only for a moment. You do not understand what that record will do. To Isla? To all of them. The estate will pull apart every agreement made since. Lawyers will call mercy fraud. Rob may lose the ground even if he does not lose his freedom. And Callum? Ewan looked away. That access would have brought work. And money. To a family from here. Hamish's voice remained gentle. The common grazing belongs to more than one family. Ewan sank into his wife's empty chair, then seemed to realize where he was, and rose again. Arthur would not listen. That is what Duncan Shaw said about another dead man. Ewan flinched at the comparison. I did not mean... Hamish raised one hand. Save it. There was no anger in the words. That made them heavier. MacNab will come for the board. Do not touch it. Ewan looked old. Then, not innocent, not harmless, merely old. A man who had once helped a widow and spent too many years believing that one good act had made his judgment trustworthy forever. Hamish opened the door. Lugs was waiting outside with rain on his coat and an expression of patient disapproval. Behind them, Ewan said, The village will never forgive me. Hamish paused. The village may surprise you. Will you? Hamish looked back. That depends on what happened beside the stone. He stepped into the rain and closed the door. The case was no longer about whether Lochdu's memory had been wrong. It was about the man who had learned how easily memory could be moved. Chapter 9. The meeting at the Fank. Ewan Ross called the gathering a crofting clarification meeting. This was meant to make it sound orderly. By 3:30, the old sheep Fank was crowded with people who had come to clarify nothing and hear everything. The rain had stopped, though water still dripped from the wire and gathered in the hollows between stones. Mrs. Patel had brought tea in 2 large flasks. Jessie Curry carried oatcakes. Nessie had brought a folding chair and immediately complained that the ground was unsuitable for it. Rob Cameron stood beside his mother near the entrance. He had shaved but still looked exhausted. Isla held herself straight, refusing every offer of a seat. Ewan waited near the centre of the fank, with the old map case under one arm. He had dressed carefully. His brown coat was brushed, his collar fastened, his silver hair combed flat against the wind. Only his hands betrayed him. They moved constantly over the brass clasp of the case. Callum Ross stood behind him. Ewan's nephew was a neat, well-fed man in his 40s who spoke often about protecting village life while owning no sheep, repairing no drains, and spending winters in Inverness. He looked at Hamish with the resentment of someone who had discovered that local policing could become inconveniently local. Blair arrived last. His Land Rover stopped too close to the fank wall, splashing mud over Archie McLean's boots. "I've called this meeting," Ewan began. "No, you have not," said Blair. "This is now a police matter." Ewan's lips tightened. "I asked people here to explain the boundary record before rumours cause more harm. The rumours were caused by Macbeth." Hamish leaned against the stone wall. "That is generous. Lochs generally manages without assistance." Blair ignored him and pointed toward Rob. "Cameron, stay where I can see you." Rob gave a tired laugh. "You've been seeing only me for 3 days. That may be because you're guilty." Isla turned her head slowly. Mrs. Patel stepped between her and Blair with a flask. "Tea, Inspector?" "No." "Good." She moved away before he could change his mind. Ewan opened the map case. "The traditional boundary has been walked in its current position for more than 40 years. Whatever irregularities existed before then, the community accepted the line." "The community did not know the whole story," Hamish said. Several heads turned. Ewan looked at him. "You have decided to make this public. You called the meeting." "I called it to prevent misunderstanding." "Aye. That has always been your talent." Callum stepped forward. "What exactly are you accusing my uncle of?" Hamish took Arthur Selwyn's notebook page from an evidence sleeve. Arthur discovered that the white marker had been shifted twice. A murmur travelled around the fank. Blair frowned. "What do you mean, twice?" Hamish looked at him. "The first move was in 1981. Isla closed her eyes briefly. "The old line would have reduced the Cameron grazing after Isla's husband died," Hamish continued. "The estate wanted the strip returned because she was behind with rent and struggling to keep the croft." Rob stared at his mother. She did not look away this time. Ewan and others helped her. Accounts were softened. Feed appeared. And during the following boundary walk, the line began turning at a different place. Ewan spoke quietly. "A woman and child would have been driven out. I know. You make it sound like theft." "No, I make it sound like mercy carried out in secret." Someone near the wall whispered that it had been a bad winter. Another voice agreed. Blair shifted impatiently. "What does this have to do with Selwyn's death?" "The stone moved again," Hamish said. The fank became still. Callum's face changed before Ewan's did. "Only slightly. But enough." Hamish continued. "The second move was recent. Not 28 metres. Only enough to strengthen the claim that an access strip for the proposed cabins lay outside the common grazing." He looked at Callum. "That strip would increase the value of your lease." Callum flushed. "The development would benefit the village." "It would benefit you first. That is not a crime." "No," said Hamish. "Moving the marker and altering records is fraud. Murder is the crime we are discussing." Blair stepped forward. "Macbeth, if you have evidence, produce it." Hamish looked at him. "I was getting there." Blair folded his arms. "The quartz chip found in Rob's Land Rover appeared damning, but it was too clean. Rob's vehicle contains enough peat and sheep hair to establish its own ecosystem. A chip carried from the moor would not arrive spotless." A few reluctant smiles appeared, then vanished. "The chip was placed there," Hamish said. "Someone knew Rob had threatened Arthur and trusted that his anger would do the rest." Rob's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "The old photograph in Isla's cottage shows the white stone nearer the twisted rowan in 1981. Arthur's measurements prove it later shifted farther again. Hamish lifted the evidence sleeve. Arthur wrote, "Stone shifted twice. 1,981 Mercy. 2,024 access route." He also wrote that Ewan Ross had the original record and had arranged to meet him at the marker. Blair turned sharply toward Ewan. Ewan's fingers stopped moving on the map case. Hamish continued. "I found Arthur's missing page hidden beneath the clip of Ewan's old map board. On the underside of that board was fresh quartz dust and a sliver from the bride's stone." Callum stared at his uncle. "You said he had no proof." Ewan looked at him with sudden weariness. "That is enough, Callum." "No, it is not. Tell them the board was there, because you inspected the stone." "I did inspect it." "After Arthur died?" Hamish asked. Ewan did not answer. Hamish stepped away from the wall. "You met Arthur in the rain. You wanted him to keep the first movement quiet because exposing it might harm Isla and Rob, but you also wanted him to accept the newer line, the one that helped Callum's access route." Ewan's voice was low. "I offered him a reasonable correction. You offered him a lie with kind history tied around it. He had no understanding of what would happen if he reported everything. He understood exactly what would happen. He simply didn't care who was hurt." Ewan looked relieved by the admission. "Yes, but that doesn't make his death an accident you were entitled to arrange." "I arranged nothing." "You argued. Beside the stone." Arthur refused to change his report. He had the notebook page in his hand. "You tried to take it." Ewan's eyes went to the quartz marker visible above the Fank wall. He stepped back and struck the stone. He lost his footing. "Perhaps." Blair gave a harsh laugh. "Perhaps? You drag us onto a hill for perhaps?" Hamish did not look at him. "What happened next matters more. Arthur was injured, possibly still alive. You could have fetched help. Instead, you took the notebook page, moved the measuring peg, and left the scene to suggest Rob had confronted him." Ewan's face had gone grey. "I panicked." "No, you made several calm decisions." The words landed quietly. "You hid the page. You cleaned a quartz chip. You placed it in Rob's Land Rover. You counted on Blair believing the loud young crofter before questioning the trusted old clerk." Blair opened his mouth. Hamish turned to him. "And he was right?" Blair's face darkened, but even he could not deny it before the whole village. Ewan lowered the map case. "No outsider ever understood that winter," he said. "The estate would have turned Isla out. Rob would have grown up somewhere else. We did what was needed." Isla's voice came from beside the entrance. "You saved us." Ewan looked at her. Something in his face broke. "Yes, but I never asked you to use it forever." Callum moved away from him. Ewan stared at his nephew. Then at the people gathered around the Fank. Some looked angry. Others looked ashamed. A few looked only sad. Hamish's voice softened. "Saving a widow once did not give you leave to sell everyone else's trust later." Ewan bowed his head. "I only wanted the village to gain something." "No," said Callum bitterly. "You wanted me to gain it." The admission sounded uglier coming from him. Blair recovered himself and stepped forward. "Ewan Ross, I'm arresting you on suspicion of the murder of Arthur Selwyn." Ewan did not resist. As MacNab led him toward the Land Rover, the village opened a path. No one spoke until the engine had faded down the track. Then Jessie held out an oatcake to Rob. "I brought too many." Nessie nodded. "She always does." Rob accepted it. It was not an apology. Lochs rarely trusted words enough for that. But Archie McLean asked whether Rob still needed help repairing the upper gate. Mrs. Patel handed Isla a flask without calling it charity. Even Blair's muddy splash on Archie's boots was forgotten. Hamish looked beyond the Fank, toward the bride's stone. The white marker remained where it had been placed, holding no opinion about mercy, greed, or murder. Stones did not lie. People merely stood beside them and told stories until the stories became boundaries. Chapter 10. The Stone Left Standing. The morning after Ewan Ross's arrest arrived clear. Sunlight lay across the moor in narrow bands. catching on wet grass and the silver threads of the burns. From the police station window, Hamish could see the upper track for the first time in days. The white stone was too far away to distinguish, but he knew where it stood. Blair telephoned shortly after breakfast. "The superintendent is satisfied," he announced. "That must be pleasant for him. I've explained how I kept pressure on the principal suspects until the evidence developed." "Suspects?" "It is important not to narrow an inquiry too early." Hamish looked at Luggs, who was waiting beside his bowl, and appeared to find this interpretation insulting on behalf of all dogs. "You were ready to charge, Rob." "I was testing his account." "With an arrest form in your pocket." Blair ignored that. "The estate has been informed. They'll conduct a formal review of the boundary and all associated agreements." "What happens to the Cameron grazing?" "Not our concern. It will be theirs." "That is land law." "Aye. A useful phrase when no one wants to admit a decision has people inside it." Blair changed the subject. "There may be press enquiries. You are to make no statement without approval." "I'll tell them you solved it." "That is more like it." Hamish put down the telephone. By mid-morning, Lochs had begun making practical amends. Archie McLean repaired the hinge on Rob Cameron's upper gate, though Rob had not asked him. 2 crofters appeared to help move feed sacks. Jessie Curry left a pot of stew at Isla's door, and later told Nessie she had merely been returning a dish, although the dish had never belonged to Isla. Mrs. Wellington offered Rob the use of her trailer. "It pulls slightly to the left," she warned. "So does mine." "Then you will know how to manage it." No one said, "We are sorry we thought you capable of murder." Lochs preferred apologies that required tools. Hamish walked to the Cameron Croft near noon. Rob was fastening wire along the repaired gate, while Isla counted lambs in the lower field. "You've an audience," Hamish said. Rob glanced toward 3 neighbours who were pretending to inspect a drain. "They've been here since 8. "Helpful?" Painfully. He twisted the wire tighter. "Blair came by." "What did he want?" "To tell me I was no longer required to assist with enquiries." "That sounds almost like an apology." "It wasna." Hamish leaned against the gate. "The estate will review the boundary." Rob's hand stopped. "So we may still lose the grazing." "Are ye?" Rob looked across the field. Several ewes stood with their lambs near the shelter wall. The disputed strip rose beyond them toward the moor. "My mother says the stone should go back to where it stood before 1981. That would be the clean answer." "You do not sound convinced." "Clean answers often belong to people who arrive after the mess." Rob gave a tired smile. "What would you do?" "I'm a policeman. Land questions require men with longer words and cleaner boots." "I am asking, Hamish." Hamish looked toward Isla. "I'd tell the truth about both moves. Then I'd argue that punishing you for a mercy given before you could speak would be another kind of dishonesty. Would that work?" "I didna say it would work." Rob nodded. "That is what my mother said you'd say." Isla joined them, carrying a length of blue twine. "Hamish?" "Isla." She tied the twine around the gatepost, though it did not appear to hold anything. "Ewan asked to see me," she said. "Will you go?" "I have not decided." Rob looked away. "He saved us," she continued. "Then he nearly destroyed my son." "Both are true." "That is the difficulty." She gazed toward the moor. "I used to think gratitude was something you carried until death. Now I wonder whether it can become a debt another person keeps collecting." Hamish said nothing. Isla untied the blue twine and wound it around her fingers. "If the old mercy is exposed, will it be punished?" "I do not know." She studied his face. "You could lie kindly." "Ah, yeah. Why do you not?" "Too many folk have done that already." Isla gave a small nod. By afternoon, 2 estate vehicles had reached the upper track. Survey flags appeared beside the boundary stones, bright red markers against the wet ground. The bride's stone remained untouched, though a temporary post stood nearby, warning that the line was under review. Blair arrived, while Hamish was watching from the lower slope. He had exchanged his muddy boots for polished ones, and was accompanied by an estate representative who kept referring to historical anomalies. Blair pointed across the moor. The legal boundary runs west from that grey marker. East, said Hamish. That is what I meant. It is the other direction. Blair lowered his hand. The important point is that we identified irregularities. Hamish decided not to correct him further. Mercy could take strange forms. The estate representative asked whether the white stone should be removed. No, said Hamish. Blair frowned. You have no authority over boundary markers. Then you may ignore me officially. The man looked uncertain. Hamish continued. Leave it standing until the review is finished. Folk should see what they are arguing about. The representative wrote this down as though it had been a formal recommendation. At dusk, Hamish walked back toward Lochs. The bride's stone caught the last light above the moor. From a distance its new scar was invisible. It looked whole, permanent, and innocent of everything said in its name. Near the police station, Sunsey appeared on the wall. The cat watched Hamish approach, then slipped into the shadows without waiting to hear what Justice had decided. Inside, Lugs had claimed the patch nearest the stove. Hamish put the kettle on. No grand lesson came to him. Only the ordinary sounds of the village. A gate closing, sheep calling from the hill, a van changing gear on the road, Mrs. Patel drawing the shop blind. The boundary walk would continue the next spring. People would still bring tea, sandwiches, sticks, and opinions. They would still disagree over stones and names. But when they reached the white marker, the story would be different. Not destroyed, not polished into something respectable, only changed enough to be true. Moral reflection, Ewan MacLeod. Lochs kept its boundary walk, though the following spring people climbed the moor more quietly. The white quartz chip had been small enough to hide beneath a Land Rover mat, yet hard enough to survive every story built around it. It reminded the village that kindness may begin as secret, but time can sharpen that secret into something capable of causing harm. Mercy is a good beginning. It is not permission forever. A community may bend a rule to save someone through a bitter winter. It must also be brave enough, one day, to admit where the rule was bent and why. That evening, the kettle boiled in the police station. Someone left oatcakes on Isla Cameron's step without signing the tin. Lugs slept beside the stove, safely beyond the reach of land law, while Sunsey remained answerable to no map at all. If an old lie once protected someone vulnerable, should a village expose it or protect it still? Closing outro. Ewan MacLeod. Thank you for walking the old moor boundary with us tonight. And when everyone blames the angry young crofter, Hamish follows a white chip back to an old kindness that turned into a lie.